Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Lewis Hamilton's given some interesting insight into the development of next year's Mercedes W15 at last night's FIA Prize Giving gala, saying he believes it's possible that they can catch Red Bull next season, but it's one thing to think that, and it's another thing to actually achieve it, given the dominance of last year's RB19. How good will the W15 be? What is James Allison cooking behind the scenes? Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. This is pretty funny. Now also, I couldn't believe my eyes last night to the FIA Prize Giving gala because Mohammed Ben Sulayem, after all the talk about his concussion, his fall, he'd been taken ill, expected to make a full recovery. This kind of came out of nowhere really shortly before the gala that he was supposedly unwell, which was... well, I'm not sure people fully bought this, to be honest. And guess what? Later in the day, here he comes, turning up at the gala like nothing's happened. You know, miraculous recovery, you've got to say, from Ben Sulayem. Here he is, giving something out here, you know, giving out a piece of a Red Bull car to this guy. And he's looking perfectly fine and well and okay. And of course, he was giving out plenty of awards during the ceremony as well. So just the whole thing is just a bit confusing, right? I mean, Ben Sulayem gets into all this drama with Toto and Susie Wolff, and like legal action will probably result as a result of this whole thing. Lewis Hamilton was calling him out during the press conference, and then he was expected not to really be attending, but it turns out that he did decide to. Maybe he just felt well enough to, and here he comes doing all the traditional things, gives out the award to Max Verstappen when he picks up his third World Championship trophy. And look, this is what Ben Sulayem usually does, but the theory was that he wasn't going to be well enough to do any of this or to give out any of the awards. I think they said, okay, he'll give it a few, but he can't do too many because he's not feeling well enough. Didn't really seem that way watching it last night. Oscar Piastri, of course, won the Rookie of the Year. Had a great season, Piastri. I wonder how much better he can go next season, because McLaren brought many big upgrades this year. Quite often, Lando got them, let's say in Austria, for example, before Oscar did. But when they actually had the same car, especially, you know, qualifying at the end of the season, Piastri, I think, outscored Norris over the last several races. But Norris's race pace was different, and Piastri, you know, there's obviously work to be done on tyre wear and stuff as a rookie. It's not easy to come through. And these were some more pictures from last night's gala with Horner, Ben Sulayem, here he is on the left-hand side, and of course Lewis Hamilton picking up his third place trophy. I know there was also talk about this, right, because there always is. Here's Max with Kelly, and you know, Ben Sulayem sitting next to him, so people say, oh, you know, here they are, best buddies again. Horner's just down the road, and look, I don't know what the future is of the FIA president, and sure, they're going to sit next to the world champion, it makes sense, but I'm not sure whether his position is going to be somewhat untenable not that long from now. Verstappen picks up his third World Championship trophy. He's probably going to have it sitting on the Red Bull fridge, isn't that right? When he streams and he plays like racing games and sim racing and stuff, he has like a little like Red Bull fridge next to him, and he just chucks the World Championship trophy on top of that like it's just some random decoration he happens to have lying about the house. But Lewis Hamilton was commenting on quite a bit actually last night. First of all, he called out the FIA massively for the drama of the last few days versus the Wolff investigation. Also says, why are we doing this in Baku when we could just do it in Paris like it used to be, where the FIA is based? Next year, if this isn't true, I would have thought, if this wasn't true, I would have thought it was a joke. But apparently this is actually true, that next year's FIA prize giving ceremony is going to be based in Rwanda. So I don't know why, I don't know what the reasons are behind this, but that's what it's going to be. Baku this year, Rwanda next year, and lots of the drivers are like, you talk all this stuff about sustainability, you talk all this about getting rid of tyre blankets and stuff like this because it's bad for the environment, but then everyone's got to fly to Baku, everyone's got to fly to Rwanda to do this ceremony when it could just be done in Paris, which is far more local to basically everybody involved. But, you know, that's really a topic for another day. But Hamilton was calling them out, but he also went on to discuss a little bit as well about their own car for next season, especially another statement. We'll see a quote from here in a second, but he congratulates Red Bull to Max and Checo, done an incredible job. Max was faultless, the team really raised the bar, and I think this is the key point, that even Mercedes during their years of winning, they weren't this sound in all elements of performance. Sure, Hamilton was faultless at times. Sure, Mercedes' strategy was pretty good and their car was impeccable. But, you know, their strategy was never quite at the level that Red Bull's tends to be. Operationally, do they ever really have the fastest pit stops? Okay, they were good but never great, and there was plenty of times where their strategy for the race was just Lewis Hamilton, a set of mediums, and inshallah, you know, like, we'll just see what happens, especially at Monaco that one year, of course, when they had him on mediums for like 70 odd laps or whatever it was to the end of the Grand Prix. So there's been a few times during that Mercedes period where they kind of relied on Hamilton and the car to bail them out of situations. Max sometimes has to do that, right? You guys remember Austin 2022 when he had the poor pit stop, the 10-second stop, he had to catch and overtake Hamilton to win the race. So sometimes Max is put in that position, but more often than not, they're just so faultless. And okay, they've had some mistakes in qualifying, Singapore 2022, not enough fuel in the car. They do make mistakes, Red Bull, it's not impossible. But as a team, they've been next level. And there's just so many areas that other teams, such as Mercedes, have to close up on if they actually want to win a championship. And Hamilton does say, we've got a lot of work to do to close the gap, but I truly do believe we can close the gap. And of course, Hamilton will be keeping a very close eye on all of the work behind the scenes in the wind tunnel with the engineers, keeping in conversations with him basically all the time, obviously thanks to his team. Somehow they still got second place this year. We started with the sister of last year's car, which was not good and not fun to drive. For most of the year, nobody gave up, and they still got second. Hamilton still got third in the Drivers' Championship, wishes everyone a Merry Christmas, all that good stuff. Now, he also commented the other day on the issue with just copying another car. He actually called out Aston Martin and basically said that they've got a green Red Bull or a green Bull or whatever. They tried to copy a car and it wasn't the same. It's not as easy as that. So sure, Aston Martin, they turned up this year with a much evolved car, and there was also rumours when they brought the B-Spec car last season that Dan Fallows, formerly of Red Bull, had brought over many similar ideas. And sure, Aston Martin took heavy inspiration from Red Bull, no doubt about it, but could they maintain the Red Bull level? They were never faster than Red Bull. They were close, to be fair, at the start of the season, but then Red Bull pulled away. Other teams pulled ahead of Aston Martin, maybe not with enough understanding of the concept they had employed. This is the issue, especially with the budget cap. You can't afford to copy a car entirely. You have to use some of your own ideas. And also, if you do copy the Red Bull, you're copying the RB19. Red Bull are now on the RB20, so you're just accepting defeat if you copy their car. You might be able to get close. The pink Mercedes was pretty good, but it was never really quicker than the Mercedes. Hamilton's words as well on the development were fascinating. So I saw the car in the wind tunnel, and seeing how it develops is fascinating. Next time I see it, it'll be completely different again. So tough to say how much positivity there really is injected into this statement. But of course, Hamilton is keeping a very close eye on the development. He's made it very clear to his engineers, look guys, I told you to do XYZ last season, and you didn't do it. You didn't put my cockpit position where I wanted it, all this type of stuff. And Hamilton's still got more out of the car this year than Russell did. And if there is one driver that Mercedes listen to when it comes to feedback, it's going to be Hamilton over Russell. So I'm sure that Hamilton's point last year, that the engineers didn't do what he told them to do, the car was bad, they're going to be listening to him this year. So I imagine he's at the factory, whatever he possibly can be, looking at the car development, speaking to James Allison, speaking to the other top engineers to figure out what's going on, what the direction is. And he says it's fascinating to see the development. So, fascinating is definitely a positive word. Does that mean the car is cooking behind the scenes? But I'm sure that it means that they're talking about the development they're making. George Russell said shortly after Abu Dhabi that, what they are seeing in development is very promising. The question is how much do Red Bull move forwards? Because I think Mercedes are confident they can get very close to where they intend to be. The question is, do Red Bull move the goalposts significantly further on? And if they do, well, frankly, good luck to anyone else involved. There was also a lot of discussion here from Allison on the issues Mercedes fell into after 2021 Abu Dhabi, what he actually described as a bit of a destructive pattern. So this was the full quote. Quite fascinating, actually, that apparently the team was very much discoordinated. As he says, when things go wrong, you can undermine your foundations, and team pressure can shake the internal organization of a team. Saying that instead of people working in harmony, it can happen that vehicle dynamics, aerodynamics, and design start working in separate compartments in search of solutions to all of their problems. If you're not careful, everyone starts working with their heads down and you stop talking to each other. And then he says that basically happened to us. I think that we entered those destructive dynamics and we lost the title in 21, and the team fragmented more than it should have. Since coming back, I have tried to get the main engineers who lead the main divisions of the company to talk to each other more and try and take some of the pressure off. That's been my job since I came back as role of TD. Nothing to do with the nuts, bolts, spring shock absorbers and wings and car bottoms. He's more involved in getting the managers of the respective teams to actually talk to each other again. Quite fascinating insight to say that after 21, and especially during the struggles of 22, there was some degree of discord within the team, and Allison hasn't exactly been working on designing a car, but he's more so been working on ensuring that the relative teams actually talk to each other and do their job well as they used to do back in the day. So, I think there's some positives in this, but there's also some negatives in the sense that things weren't clearly working that well behind the scenes at Mercedes. And maybe that's fixed now over the last 6 months, but that's 6 months of time to fix these internal issues that could have been spent on making the best car possible, which is arguably one of the reasons why they've struggled over the last couple of years. Still though, P2 in the Constructors' Championship still beat out Ferrari just about, and of course the other contenders as well. So if theoretically the internal dynamics this upcoming season are much better, they could make significant strides. The other point really is which other teams could be contenders, because we'll see in a second here the fact that Hamilton actually this year had less points than he did last year, but he was still far higher in the championship, basically because there was way more competition for seconds. Ferrari, McLaren, Aston Martin. Now Christian Horner actually mentions 3 teams that aren't Aston Martin, all of the 3, any 3 of the major teams, so not counting Aston as a major team, which I guess is probably fair enough. They've only had like 1 year being competitive, and they did still get beaten in the end by McLaren, so I get it. But then again, given what Aston did at the start of last season, P2s, let's not forget Alonso was technically leading the championship when he led the opening couple of laps of Jeddah. At that point, with Max way back in the fields, technically Alonso for those few laps in the lead of the championship, but of course that wasn't what transpired by the end of the Grand Prix. But then again, obviously the upgrades were made. So Horner reckons that any of Mercedes, Ferrari or McLaren could be contenders. We fully expect the field to converge. Now, look, he said the same thing last year about the RB18 going into the RB19, and we saw something rather different. But they do, of course, have the least wind tunnel testing time of anybody. Last year, this was reduced even further by another 10% because of the cost cap penalty from 21. But based on the current standings, Red Bull have from January to June 2024, 168 hours of wind tunnel testing time and CFD stuff, all this good stuff. Mercedes is second at 180, then Ferrari, McLaren, Aston, and you see it go down from there. I think 240 is the standard number at 100% for P7, and then it gets increased or reduced based on, by like 5% intervals, basically, on the performance of the respective teams. Of course, one of the reasons the other day why Zach Brown is seemingly somewhat concerned about the development of AlphaTauri is that, there's definitely some team principals that believe that the relationship here between Red Bull and AlphaTauri is closer than they make out it to be, right? On paper, nothing that AlphaTauri find in the wind tunnel can go to Red Bull or vice versa. But I think there's some teams that think that it's at least possible, and that, do Red Bull really have 168 hours, or is there something else going on behind the scenes? Frankly, probably not, but we will never really know, and the FIA even say themselves that policing that potential passage of information is so difficult, they can't really properly do it. So I don't think it's going to be the last time we talk about that for the rest of the off-season. A couple of other things to mention. This from Théo Pourchaire, recent Formula 2 champion, of course, with the Sauber Academy group, saying that he is disappointed that he didn't get a Formula 1 seat and believes he straight up deserved it. The goal I was given by the Sauber Academy was to win the championship, and I did that. Yes, he did it. He did it marginally. He did it in his 3rd season in Formula 2, I believe. So it wasn't like a, remarkably impressive. And even Oscar Piastri had to take a year out. This is the thing, though. There's a very good argument to say that the Formula 2 feeder series don't even really work. I mean, a lot of these guys who are very talented drivers, and arguably if you win F2, you should be given a Formula 1 seat. The problem is that's not how it works. You're not mandated to have that occur. So you have to kind of make the call. Do I sit on the sidelines, wait for Zhou to get kicked or whatever, which might happen, but Zhou brings some money into the team. So that's the problem with these teams. And at the end of the day, if there were 11 teams or 12 teams, then there'd be more seats available. And would Pourchaire be better than Zhou? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. It's I think it's a valuable debate to have, especially now Zhou's got a couple of years of experience under his belt, which is sometimes what the teams want if they want to have better performance rather than taking chances on rookies, even if they are the Formula 2 champion. So it's just the nature of things that Pourchaire, I'm sure he knows this, and I'm sure other drivers know this as well, that just because you win F2 doesn't entitle you to anything. Maybe it should, but that's not the way the sport works. And AlphaTauri with some similar questions as well, because Red Bull have had so many juniors over the last several years. And if you're a Red Bull junior right now, you're not particularly happy to hear this news, although this is the sensible decision from AlphaTauri, or Racing Bulls, whatever they're going to be next year. AlphaTauri is changing its approach to young drivers. We will not race with 2 juniors. We will always have 1 experienced driver. So it's interesting to hear this. It's, obviously Red Bull are changing their perspective maybe somewhat. They prefer their second team not to just be driving around at the back of the field with 2 rookies, but rather they prefer those drivers develop, but also have a more experienced driver in the car that can lead development directly direction. This is one of the things. Experience not only gives you generally more pace, especially race pace and good racecraft, but also you tend to get better at developing the car. This is the big thing that Ricciardo is, well, being talked about around that team, that Ricciardo came in, gave them lots of good ideas of development direction and feedback for the team. And that's very valuable if the team wants to be better than they have been for the last couple of years. So that's the new Racing Bulls plan, is to only ever have one rookie or one junior, really. And of course, people will say, well, you know, maybe their current junior or developing junior Yuki Tsunoda is actually better than one of their experienced guys in the main team. And maybe he's better than Ricciardo. That's been a debate at the end of the season as well. But Ricciardo, we think, might get the Red Bull seat sooner rather than later. And just to close out the video, I did mention I'd share this for you guys, that the 2022 versus 23 drivers' points comparison. So Verstappen went up by 121, kind of insane. Perez actually went down. Hamilton basically was the same. But last year, that was good enough for what, P6? Was it Hamilton last year's championship? This year it was good enough for P3. It just shows how competitive things were. Alonso goes from 81 with Alpine up to 206, tied with Leclerc, but Alonso wins as a result of better average positions and stuff like this. Leclerc went down 102, but still had a good season. Norris was up 83, Sainz was down somewhat. Russell was, apart from Leclerc, the biggest loser here, really losing 100 points season on season. Piastri gained 97 from 0, but, you know, kind of can't really judge his previous season because it didn't exist. And then Stroll here also making the top 10. So just goes to show really the story of the season, that Verstappen was even more dominant. And then from P3 to P9, P10 really was just, you know, all sorts of teams all over the place, which does definitely sum up the year. But hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.